when an individual who has been working for a company for a really long time put their time in and is watching other people be promoted over them simply for biased reasons, that individual can freely pursue work without having their employee overlord. When there is a system in place that serves that individual, that's what success looks like.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Activating Curiosity. I am Ryan Ware, and just want to say I appreciate all of you as listeners, and to everyone who is sharing the podcast with your network. Continue to do that. It helps us build that awareness out into the community, the things that we're aiming to do with the podcast and keeping our curiosity at the highest level. So with that, I'm excited about the guest today. We have Mandy McGill with Aedifico out of Seattle. Hey, Mandy, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm glad you're willing to do this and be a part of it. So before we dive into activating curiosity, why don't you tell a little bit about your past, how you, where you kind of got started in this industry?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been a part of the sort of CRE AEC industry for about 15 years now. Always an entrepreneur, or at least, subtract 6 months from that where I did try working full time for someone. And started out as a recruiter doing recruitment services for lots of different companies in Seattle. Sort of rode the tech wave, if you will. Like, so many buildings going up. We had the most cranes in the sky for like 10 years in Seattle. So, so kind of rode that wave as an entrepreneur and a recruiter, helping AEC teams grow and, helping my clients find the right talent for, the types of projects they were building. And, through that have, served on different public task forces, learned a lot about the development process and, where we're missing pieces and where it's really not sufficient and working the way that it could be. And then about 2.5 years ago, um, I was meeting with a lot of candidates who were feeling frustrated with their employer. And I just started feeling this sense that, like, I can no longer place people in new roles in good conscience because I knew that the culture that they were trying to leave is the same one that they would enter again. It would just be different faces. Right. Um, so I started asking myself, in what ways could I help these people like launch their own thing? And thinking about how maybe I could do BD for them or business development, and helping them grow in that way. But meanwhile, I also just had this obsession with technology and saw how fintech was starting to change the way that we use money. And so I started thinking about how that's going to change our industry pretty drastically. And so I got my certificate in financial technology from the University of Washington. So, like, that was all kind of happening at once, where this technology piece was always in my head. And I was thinking about, how do I scale something, right? Um, so that's kind of like the beginning of, how Aedifico came to be. And by the way, it is Aedifico. So
Aedifico.
yeah. People get it eventually. Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, no, thanks for clarifying that. I think it, there's something behind the story of that name that I'm guessing the Aedifico name and that
Mm.
journey that has kind of gotten you to this. Like, it sounds like there was a bit of a aha moment. Like, I'm sending people down a path that is just creating a frustration that maybe came to light for you in there. But how, the name Aedifico, like, how did you come to that?
Sure. So I worked with a team and, so they were my co-founders and we created this really fun startup community amongst us. And so we were throwing a lot of names out there. And one of the individuals is actually from Colombia. And so we were playing around with, just different languages, right? And so we fell on Aedifico because it's Latin for I build.
Mm, okay.
And so I know we'll dive deeper into like what Identifico is, why it exists. And so it just felt like that name really struck a chord. And also because we had an international team, it was just honoring kind of that piece that, if the platform were to become worldwide, that, there would be a lot of people that that name would really resonate with.
Mhm.
It did not resonate with venture. So, I've been told multiple times that I need to change it. So, there's that.
It makes a lot of sense when you say the I build, but there's a story behind it, right? Like you just got to tell that story of how you like. There's a purpose. There's a
Mhm,
greater purpose for why you started the company, which allows you to tell the story by the name
mhm.
because it's not like Mandy McGill Consulting or something, right? Like,
Right.
or something that's like, oh well, it's just it maybe doesn't have the power that you were hoping for. So I wanted to hear that story because that's actually the first time I've gotten a chance to. Thank you for setting that up, and I think you gave some insight into this next question, but um, you got to this point. So what is the biggest problem that you're aiming to solve?
Mm. Yeah, Diffico actually solves a lot of problems, but I think fundamentally it aligns the industry with the future of work. So what does that mean? Well, we we sort of designed all the way we work around the industrial revolution, which is
Mhm.
companies coming together and, as a group of people and employees. And there are many, many reasons for why we got to where we got to with employers. And those things were important at the time, protecting workers and things like that. But our industry is definitely not designed around the digital revolution, which is where we are now.
Right, right,
So, essentially, what this does is it decentralizes work and gives individuals the power to work on projects that they want to work on, not just the projects that the company they work for happen to have won. Yeah.
yeah. That's an interesting way to put it, and I want to make sure that it's clarified. So decentralized being a big part of it in the concept, which we can dive into that word I think a little more,
Hmm.
um, because it's one thing within operations of a team, and I'll go to like active operations where you're putting the problem solving closer to the customer or to that group as they're working on it. And I think in your what you just described is this from an industry standpoint, putting people closer to their own purpose. Is it decentralized because it's not connected necessarily to one corporation?
Yes,
Um, okay. All right. So maybe dive in then into the word decentralized and kind of break that down because I think it's a tremendous idea in this. Well, let's go back to the beginning of work. Like you said, the industrialized revolution, there's been four of them. And this fourth one that we're currently in, the pace of which it's happening in a global market,
hmm hmm
um, finding talent from anywhere to do anything that you're needing them to do based off certain platforms. So when you're talking in this construction industry, is putting individuals more aligned with their purpose and their passion for what they want to be working on. How, describe that a little more. if you can.
Sure, but first I think it might help for a little more context.
Okay.
The way just so that people can understand instead of, like, talking theory for a second, let's just, like, here's how the tool is used, right? So you go to Aedifico, and so you are a developer, okay? You're a developer. You can be a small one, a small multifamily developer, or you could be an end user developer, right?
Mhm.
And you go to the platform, and it's not like LinkedIn where you're like, "Oh, let me, like, search for keywords." I mean, keywords are a part of it, but what you do is you enter your scope of work,
Mm.
and then the scope then we use AI to match that scope with individuals who can perform that scope of work. And so just to make sure that, like, that feels clear for your audience, that that's how it works. So it's a developer tool as much as it is a tool for individuals who don't want to work for a company. And so because they're entering a scope of work instead of a job description, it aligns the whole industry around staffing a project instead of staffing a company.
Okay.
Does
Yeah, I
that make
think
sense to
no,
you?
that makes a lot of sense, right? So we think about it all the times of these ebbs and flows in the industry, and we saw it in 2008. Unfortunately,
Mhm,
during that downturn, or even COVID, of like you have built an entire team for a business. There are projects in certain sectors come and go, and how do you shift around that as they tick up? So I think you laid it out in the sense that it isn't just about the individual searching. It is about, that developer, regardless of, where they are in that spectrum of what they're, you know, actually want the building to be, right? Whether it's, like you said, it's residential side to larger corporate facilities, it gives them a platform outside the noise potentially of LinkedIn, of like, there's just millions of people, coming in and bearing HR with resumes. The other side of that is individuals feel like, hey, I'm not even visible to any of this. You're providing, if here is actually what I'm needing for this project.
mhm,
Not here's a long-term contract and commitment and employment. It is, this is very specific. This is based off who do who has the passion and the talent to align with that.
yep,
Right. Okay.
that's
I wanted
exactly
to make
right,
sure
yeah.
we nailed that down, because I think it is a very different approach. And we'll get to this because I think I'm starting to already hear, like, there's a lot of mindset shift
Yes,
towards
that's right.
this, for a lot of people. So, you know, is that so given that, then is that one of the biggest sort of barriers, is how to, for teams or businesses to, well, now this is here versus the old traditional way of like, well, how does that change culture? How does that change process? How does it change how HR and operations, wait, all the whole business needs to be thinking about this.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
Is what other obstacles, or maybe we drill into that a little bit of like how they should be thinking about it,
yeah.
to be successful then.
Yeah, these are definitely the obstacles, right? Because it requires you to think in a very different way, and the way that you staff anything, and there are entire departments of companies that exist to do what Idifico does. So on a smaller scale, it's HR and when I
Mhm.
say smaller scale, what I mean is if you're an AEC company, um, HR, like, they may wanna use the tool, but the tool kinda replaces them. And so it's challenging, for the AEC companies to think about using it in this way. I'm under NDA with several different, end users, that a lot of my network is them, and
Mhm.
I see this being a tool that they could adopt, faster because they already, like, a lot of them are tech companies themselves, right? So,
Right.
they're sort of encouraged to adopt things like this. However, in this case for them, the challenge is procurement, and the procurement department doesn't really understand how to treat us because they're used to just bringing on an AEC company to do the work, right? So,
Hmm.
I'm not under NDA with Boeing, for example. I mean, I spoke with the head of construction and real estate for Boeing. We had lunch. He was mind blown, just stoked about how this could literally change his life personally.
Right. Right.
And yet, when he spoke with procurement, um, they were like, "We don't know what that is, and we don't wanna spend the time to know what that is." And, uh, there's room there. There's still follow-up that needs to happen and will happen, in the right time. But, for now, those are the things they have processes, and because this Aedifico doesn't fall into their, um normal way of working, it makes it really challenging. And also, if we could go back to decentralization just for a
Hmm.
second, um, I think, that term does get thrown around a lot, and there are lots of different contexts in which you can look at decentralization, but in this case, um, centralization just really is defined by employment, and decentralization is taking the work and scattering it, such that it can reach more people.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you went back to it because just thinking about getting that clarity and thinking about what you just kind of brought up with the challenges. So centralized being like, hey, HR does the traditional route. You're bringing in employees through recruitment and then retainment. In this case, it is taking that piece out, getting a broader look at the skill set and the talent aligned with the need that you're looking to fill for that project,
Mhm.
not just in a national, but potentially global footprint.
That's right.
Okay. And then, so with that, like you just said, then it's not that there's procurement, HR, and I think as we think about everybody's mindset around AI, oh my gosh, it's going to take my job. It's going to take my job. Well, the second industrial
Mhm.
revolution, and then
Mhm.
the third, right? Like we were never meant to continue to work the way we're working. And in some countries, that's not the case. But in the United States, like where we were supposed to see a decrease due to those, industrial revolutions, like we actually increased the amount of hours we spend
Mhm. That's right.
in, in doing a lot of things that we may, are we busy or are we busy?
Mm.
And what are we focused on? And I think with this technology, as you're saying, it's this our mindset around what should we actually be focused on? What should we be doing? Because with HR, you just mentioned it. Like, will it replace them, or does the role of HR within a corporation or within another business disappear, or the role shifts to this new approach of the way you're discussing, kind of forming, think about building, going from first plan concept all the way through occupancy. Um, then I think about procurement too, and something you just said, which is interesting, is anything new, anything new that's brought to the table. It's always like, well, I don't recognize it, so boom, I'm going to default mode. So default mode is, it's that system in our head. It's like I haven't built a habit or a routine around it. So
Mhm.
therefore, it's a lot more energy for me to look at this new thing and put together a processy for it. So, whether it gets solved, something we're talking through today, but I think it's interesting in that it doesn't mean it's a wrong answer. It means that it's new territory. And what does that look like for procurement teams
Mhm.
who generally, it's they write a contract, like you said, and sign and bring somebody on board. Um, Anything else that you can think of from a barrier? I mean, those are definitely ones that, you know, will get us curious. Like, how should we be looking at this differently?
Mm.
Is there anything else that you've come across, like where someone's not accepting it or pushed back, and how to think about it differently?
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I would just add, and it comes along the same line as like culture and process, and this is familiar, is that this is one of the very few industries that relationships still matter,
Hmm.
and they matter a lot. And I say that as a human who appreciates relationships. On the other hand, what ends up happening when you just keep going to your same contractor is that, like, the good old boys flywheel just keeps on going, right? And
Right.
so I do think it's going to be disrupted. It has to be for other reasons we could go into. But I think that uh that is one of the main barriers as well, is just that, well, I got my guy. My guy does it for me, right? And so even if you can supply a less expensive, way more amazing, talented person, that's not my guy. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's fair. And I think, you're located up in Seattle in the Puget Sound, right? And we, having worked there or even around the Bay Area or now, in
Mhm.
Ohio, it's like everywhere I've been, the industry can feel enormous, but at the same time, very small. Like very small and tight, as you said. And I don't think that what you're saying is like, hey, you got to get rid of all of these things. It's like we know we have a labor challenge. And to be honest,
Mhm.
I've been trying to not say labor shortage, because I think with the word shortage, my own personal belief is that we think, oh, we just fill it with supply and it's taken care of. Well, that's not happening. Like
Mm.
that's a real problem for all industries, not just construction. So how can we reframe, where the talent will be, um, when we're choosing to live where we sort of want to live, and there's a need to go build a hospital in West Texas. Well, you're building cities in West Texas to build hospitals because the talent pool isn't regional. So these things are already starting to occur, to go away from I've got my person. And I like how you have empathy for it. Like, we're all human. It's complex. It's just very complex. But it doesn't mean that procurement teams and HR shouldn't be thinking like, well, what is that future of work, like you said? Because we're going to see, in the next few years and decade, like this mass sort of exodus, retirees towards other jobs starting to pique interest, people leaving, and the AGC will tell you like, hey, we have an emptying bucket, or even an architecture firm. So the problem's not being solved now by having my person, right? Like,
That's right.
um, so reframing it and thinking like, again, back to this mindset, onto
Mm.
that new territory, and how I've never seen this or thought about it, but if we were to think like, hey, here's the construction industry, is there an industry where you're seeing this concept? Or, I think about like traveling nurses, right? Like,
Mhm. Yeah.
so, okay. So with that, I'm gonna hand it to you. What drew you to say, hey, like this is working in other industries? What have they done? How did they break down some of those barriers?
Yeah. So I really looked a lot to Upwork as an example for how this could be done, and really kind of designed it very similarly to Upwork, other than acknowledging that our industry has a lot of very specific needs and licenses and
Hmm.
certain education that is really important. So that was sort of built into the system. But yeah, certainly Upwork, and it is being done in obviously in tech a ton. I know that Upwork has a lot of big contracts with Microsoft, for example, right? Where they just utilize the talent that's on the platform, and they have kind of a special kind of deal with them, I suppose. So that really is kind of how I saw it. And I think what's really interesting to think about, so this was like, I'm talking 2 years ago, right? 2.5 years ago, that like all of this was like formulating in my head.
Right.
Now, and because things are advancing so rapidly, I recently interviewed Ravin Jesuthasan. He's the author of lots and lots of books and is part of the World Economic Forum and all of this. And this is not a political statement, believe me, so don't come at me with it. But um, he is with Mercer, and Mercer is a consultant that works with really big HR firms. And so I know, for example, that IBM has already implemented the platform model in both internally and externally. So that means that, like, internally, everything is designed around a project. And if you are a full time employee at IBM, you can say, I want to work on this project. I want to work on this project. I don't want to work on this project. And then they supplement through other platforms like Upwork, those jobs that they don't need internally. And companies, they don't want to hire. They just straight up don't want to hire. And right now, like, the fact is, AI is going to replace many jobs in AEC.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think, like, this is the way that I'm viewing it now. This kind of continued through that thread of decentralization, is that that's even happening within companies now, where they're no longer like, here's a job. The title of Robin's book is Work Without Jobs.
Okay.
And so, you know, they just don't even talk about jobs and job descriptions anymore. It's just, here's a project. Are you capable of, like, being a part of this project team or not? And cool. And it, like, literally, like, people flow. They flow to the work when it's needed, and then they flow away from the work when it's not needed any longer.
Hmm. I can't help but think, like, as you just described that, like, that's what happens inside of businesses naturally. It's just pulling it into a larger forum of, they may not be in your business, because as projects come and go, especially in the architecture side, where I came from, like, there's studios, there are experts in those areas. And even in large general construction companies, like, there are people who focus on, like, that's all they do is that one client. Like, if you
That's
think
right.
about, this isn't true in every area, but if you bring up the big GCs on the West Coast and some of the other areas, that's how they function.
Hmm.
So it's not, it's just stretching our minds maybe a little bit of, like, you're sort of taking what and saying, like, what if you had a way to find, that person out there that was in studio A or studio B. They're just now similarly in studio here or there, and you're connected to them. And again, when you just said it, it started making me think, like, we already do that. Like, architects already partner, and so do GCs through, it's not always JVs. It doesn't have to be to that contract model. But, like, there are small architecture firms who become the architect of record versus the design architect based off skill sets in regions where they can't go, the way NCARB works with licensure in companies or settings. So again, back to the, is this totally new, or is it just a different way of thinking
Mm.
of how we're already doing it by stretching the opportunity further than we've seen it before? Just wanted to share that because back to the curiosity piece is, oh, is it really that new, or how are we thinking about it? So
Right, right. No, I love that. Thank you for pointing that out, and I think, it's always helpful when people have some kind of, like, basis of understanding that you can build on when you're sharing, and it's almost, I would say, 95% of the time when people say, "What do you do?" and I ask them if they know what Upwork is, and they don't, it's like,
mhm.
"Oh, shit." Like, okay, we're really, and it's like people
Yep.
don't have the time or the brain capacity, and I'm not saying it's not that this is about intelligence, but these people are working 80-hour weeks.
Right.
you know,
Right.
like, they don't have time to learn something new. And,
Yeah.
and so if you have to start that early in your education process just to simply have a conversation about what you're doing, then perhaps you're too early.
Yeah.
That's a lesson for me that I'm learning, you
Well,
know?
yeah, and you just said something that I think is, again, why, for me, starting the podcast was so important. Is I am tired of hearing I don't have time to learn something new. That is one of
Mhm,
the one of the reasons I was like, look, the problem I'm aiming to solve, and when why I'm appreciating this conversation is that we've got to, like, that is what we're supposed to do. That is literally why we became, practiced architecture or in construction, is to solve problems. So something isn't working if we don't have time to learn something new, which means the new thing might be what gives us back our time
that's
to do
right.
what we love, to do what we're passionate about, to do the things that got us into this the first time, where the other stuff that is mental real estate, squatters living in our own head, where we can't release out of that so that we can do what we're passionate about, then if we can't solve that, I don't know who does. And I don't mean you and I just mean as individuals, and the whole industry side is like, we got to ask the question, like, why don't we have time to learn something new?
Mm,
Like you just said, because what you're bringing to the table is, hey, this is a different way to looking at solving the problems of getting the talent to the project in an area where the project need is there. That's something the owner wants to do. And over here on this side is a project team that really wants to do it. It isn't forced compliance. It isn't forced on them because someone went and won it inside of a firm, and, well, you don't have anything on your plate over here, so you're going to go work on this. So anyway, that gets me passionate, but I
mhm,
just think
good.
that we have a responsibility for our own, like, as individuals, to be asking that question of, like, what is it that's taking up my time that I don't have time to learn? So, maybe maybe that answers this next question, like, what is it costing us
Mm,
if we don't solve the issue?
mhm.
So what do you think about that? Like, if we don't solve what you're aiming to solve, like, what do you think the impact is for this industry?
Yeah, so I guess I'll say I do think the problem that I described is going to be solved. It's just that it won't be intentional, and the changes that will happen over time and how the problem sort of solves itself, are gonna be really painful. So, I think if the problem is talent doesn't wanna be in our industry, um, the way that that will eventually be solved, and this bucket that you're talking about, or, these jobs that could supposedly be filled, They just won't exist anymore.
Mhm.
And I think that AI is going to solve this for us in different ways. So one of them is going to be that the AI will do a lot of what humans currently do. The other way that AI is going to solve it is that the humans that hang out and stay in the industry um, will be able to connect in the same way that I'm describing Aedifico, but it will just be probably through one of the large language models. I'm not sure if you heard the announcement that OpenAI is actually going to open up a jobs platform mid 2026. And what that means is that they'll start certifying people in in AI specifically. So you'll be able to take an AI test and it will give you a score, and then people will be able to find you based on your ability to use AI.
Yeah.
And the way that it's going to work in the future is that we'll all have tokens associated with our skills. And the tokens will then match up. So you have a certification, it's a digital token. You have a degree, it's a digital token. And so AI will immediately be able to connect you with whoever needs your skills. And so I, I I mean, I've described to you a couple ways that like I'm early. Idifico is really early and perhaps too early. And it's possible that AI will just naturally, like as people start to use it more and more, and it becomes the way that we do our work, that will just be a natural inflow of that the talent sort of exists in the same platform as the how the operations are now happening. Is this making
Mm.
sense what I'm saying, Ryan?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is that, well, one, it's about time that we teach people how to use AI.
Mm,
I always said I'm not afraid of AI. It's the humans not understanding how
mm,
to use it. It's how to look at the tool in a way that accelerates your own being and providing greater opportunity, I think, for many individuals. And it makes complete sense from, we started thinking about blockchain and it just gets deep. I say that a lot on this podcast, but that, getting to a digital, currency or digital area, we've been on this path for making more from less things.
mm,
And in this AI, like you said, this connection that I'm hearing is that we'll all sort of be in this digital world, and it'll be a quicker way to start to connect individuals to a project, to an opportunity, to whatever skill set, background. And if you've done it the way you wanted to do it, then your passion, your personal purpose is then tied to that as well, because you got to make that choice. You
mhm,
you weren't forced to go down a path. You chose, like, this is the arena I like to be in. And I think about it now, just you go on LinkedIn, it's like all the stories of just individuals who are so frustrated by this job market, which has just been stalled for certain areas like years. The future jobs are not created um in a lot of arenas, but in the construction, like, there is going to be a change in certain roles. um there always has been. That came true when the computer came out. It came true when the web was more accessible and everything, and the way we've done it throughout of our careers in this industry. So I look at it that, is it early, or is it you go through this educational piece that is required? And we have to appreciate that. I think, well, to me, to you, like, hearing the story is like, there's an opportunity of learning that we should be celebrating about all of these things that are coming. Like,
mm,
this is our real opportunity to learn, to see this, the messy middle part of change of, like, I get to be a part of this. It's not forced on me. It's not this. I get to choose my own adventure in it.
Mhm.
or choose to, ignore it and then fall victim to it potentially. And I'm not saying that you are a victim of it. It's just where your mind will take you as an individual. So yes, there are things that might solve it, but we should be making our own choices if we're going to dive in and be a part of solving it.
Mhm.
Or just let, and I'm not a huge fan of the word disrupt because I think people hear the word, it's going to disrupt, and it's like, that's more work, that's more pain, that's all of these other things. And I think you said at the very beginning so clearly was there's an opportunity. And there's an opportunity to remap how we think about staffing projects and delivering projects from early concept development all the way through.
Mhm.
How did that sound? How did that
Yes, yes.
summary sound?
No, yeah, that's I mean, you said it well.
We've talked before and some things have pivoted and I think that's your agility of like, hey, things are going to shift, new things are going to come out. Um, but to you, from your vantage point and knowing what Aedifico, what you want to do personally with it, what you're seeing and what you're hearing, like what does success look like to you from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think, that the success really isn't about me. It's to me, success will look like when an individual who has been working for a company for a really long time, put their time in and is watching other people be promoted over them simply for biased reasons, that individual can freely pursue work, without having their employee overlord. When there is a system in place that serves that individual, that's what success looks like.
Yeah, that's powerful. Um, you tied it back to the human side. Sometimes businesses are seen as this big machine and I think this goes, you've done a lot of work working on those individuals to find them opportunities that in the end it is a human
Mhm.
piece, not a technology piece. It is technology as a tool that we can use as individuals. So I appreciate you sharing that. So given that, then, you're diving forward, you're moving, you're having these conversations. Like, what would you say some next steps and actions that people could do if they wanted to learn more, have dialogue, just like we're having with you, hear you having dialogue? Like, what are some next things that they could do?
Sure. I think, well, first of all, sharing this message and this podcast, I think is like paramount to me. That is the most important thing to get the message out, because like you and I having this conversation is great, but like a million people sharing it is better.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And then as far as like where people can, find me, I've sort of, I'm really deep in the blockchain weeds right now, and looking at how we might solve real estate problems from the financial perspective and the digitization of real world assets. And so I'm learning a lot about that, and I'm sharing all of my learning on TikTok, because there just is so much more reach on TikTok than we see on LinkedIn or any other social media
Hmm.
platforms. I feel strange on TikTok, if I'm being honest, because I'm a zennial, like I'm a Gen X. I'm an
Uh-huh.
ancient millennial who is learning these new tools. And but people can find me at Mandy Aedifico on TikTok if they happen to be on it. And then, people can reach out to me on LinkedIn if they'd like and want to have a conversation about Aedifico. I mean, it's a fully working MVP. And so if they're interested in talking more, I'd be happy to chat about it.
Okay. And we will share all of your information into the link, both on YouTube and on the podcast, wherever they get their podcast so that you can reach out to Mandy and have further conversation. Like she said, like we barely got into it, I think. Like that
Yeah.
started part. But again, I tell everybody like activating curiosity is just that. We want you to be more curious. We want you to dive into those questions. And to be honest, like we will probably have another conversation as you begin to work, more into that area because it's a new way to think about it. Like I know there are people, what's crypto, what's blockchain, whatever, all these things that they're going to want to understand,
Hmm.
but we don't want to overwhelm at the same time.
Oh,
But hopefully
100%.
people are willing to just have the dialogue and just out of that curiosity, take a look at articles, take a look at, what others are doing, watch some videos that Mandy has out on YouTube. I get you on the TikTok. Yes, as an old Gen Xer. I'm not even in that. I feel older sometimes. But it's TikTok is an area where we can reach a lot of people to pique that interest. So I appreciate you doing it. I think, you're putting out good work on LinkedIn. And I think the reason we keep saying is sharing it through podcasts and other areas is that we live in a digital world where an algorithm will get it stuck. And if you do find that this conversation is interesting, we need more people having it because in the end, as Mandy said, this is about you. You are human. What she's aiming to solve is to try to help all of us get more aligned with our purpose and be focused on
Hmm.
designing and building the way we want to be doing that. So, Mandy, I appreciate the conversation. I enjoyed it. Thanks for being here. Any last thoughts you have?
Just appreciate you. Thank you for your work. I'm excited to continue to follow it, excited to see where you go. And, you're doing a great job. So just appreciate you. Thanks, Ryan.
Well, I appreciate that as well, and I appreciate you and the conversation, and look forward to hearing how listeners interact with it.
Yeah,
Thanks. Have a good one.
me too. All right. You too. Take care.
So that is the show with Mandy McGill, the founder of Aedifico. And I know it could feel overwhelming, the idea of a decentralized sort of labor force as you're approaching projects and the construction industry. But really wanted to dive into how we think about it today in the current workforce and really talking about the future. And as we kind of ramped up and weren't in recording, something that Mandy mentioned was that, hey, the future generation isn't going to want to work the way maybe all of us have been trained to work. Huge amount of hours. And what I'll typically tell people is like burnout cannot be the bar in which we feel people have enough expertise or enough experience to continue on in this industry. So if we want to be able to attract and retain people, within firms, within the construction side, we've got to rethink how we look at the work, how we think about the human side as it relates to this. And that's why I think, HR may not be totally removed if we're not focused on the change management and the culture that would be required for anything having to do with a decentralized labor force. So the next generation isn't going to want the future workforce to feel the way it does now or anything like it did when, baby boomers or Gen X first got into the workforce. It's our responsibility and it's on us to figure out what does this future industry look like? What legacy do I want to leave behind as an individual? And I know it can feel like a lot, but if this has hopefully activated more curiosity into thinking about it, then it's done its job. Because if we just look at it now and say, like, we know it's not working the way we want it to, then what might be possible? And then that's really where Mandy and I kind of connected and wanted to make sure that we started that conversation and got people some insight around it to carry that conversation forward. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, I hope you stay well. I hope you continue to take on those challenges and continue to find ways to work individually and as teams while also staying focused on activating your curiosity. The Activating Curiosity podcast is brought to you by Connective Consulting Group and Connective Coaching, part of the Curiosity Building Experiences. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss a conversation. Share the podcast with your network and help us bring more curiosity into the construction industry. Interested in becoming a guest or a sponsor? Visit us at activatingcuriosity.buzzsprout.com for more details. Until next time, keep leading with curiosity.